The order came down from the Defense Committee of the Council of People's Commissars in the late autumn of 1938, and it carried the full weight of Stalin's personal ambition behind every typed character on the page. The Soviet Union would build a tank unlike anything the world had yet produced, a land fortress that would render obsolete every armored vehicle currently fielded by any European power. A machine that would answer the embarrassing lessons absorbed during the Spanish Civil War, where Soviet-supplied T-26 light tanks had been torn apart by German 37mm anti-tank guns with something approaching casual efficiency. And the engineers at the Kirov Factory in Leningrad, the same sprawling industrial complex that had been producing Soviet armor since the early 1930s, received the specification with a mixture of professional excitement and quiet engineering dread. Because what was being asked of them was not merely ambitious, it was, in the coldest technical language, barely feasible given the metallurgical and mechanical constraints of Soviet industry in 1938. The specification called for a multi-turreted heavy tank exceeding 40 tons, capable of mounting a 76.2mm main gun in a primary turret and a 45mm gun in a secondary turret positioned forward of the main, with armor plating of up to 60mm on the hull front. And the design team, led by engineer Sergei Ginsburg and overseen by the Kirov Factory's technical directorate, began producing blueprints through the winter, working in buildings where the Leningrad cold pressed through the walls and condensation formed on the drafting tables overnight, where the smell of machine oil and iron filings was so constant it ceased to register, where shift workers rotated through 20-hour cycles because the deadline was political and therefore non-negotiable. The resulting design, designated SMK, Sergei Mironovich Kirov, named for the assassinated Leningrad party chief whose death had triggered Stalin's Great Purge, was a vehicle of extraordinary ambition and almost immediate practical contradiction. It measured 8.75 meters in length, 3.4 meters in width, and stood over 3.3 meters tall, dimensions that placed it in a category of armored vehicle the Soviet military had never actually operated in the field. And the engineers knew, even as they finalized the armor layouts and the torsion bar suspension design that replaced the earlier leaf spring proposal, that moving such a machine across the typical Soviet and Finnish terrain, soft ground, dense forest, frozen marsh, narrow forest tracks, would require conditions that the vehicle itself could not guarantee. The suspension system alone represented a significant engineering achievement. The SMK used an individual torsion bar arrangement across 12 road wheels per side, a design that offered theoretically superior cross-country performance compared to the older Christie suspension used in the BT series, but which added weight and mechanical complexity at every junction. And the total combat weight of the completed prototype came in at approximately 55 tons, a figure that meant every bridge in the Soviet Union's western military districts would need to be assessed before the tank could be deployed operationally, and most would fail that assessment without structural reinforcement. The single prototype was completed and rolled out of the Kirov factory in the late summer of 1939, an event attended by senior military officials and factory party representatives. And the machine that emerged from the assembly hall was visually overwhelming. Its hull a long, low slab of gray-green rolled steel, its two turrets stacked in offset configuration, giving it the silhouette of an industrial building that had somehow been given a drivetrain, its 850 horsepower AM-34 aircraft engine producing a deep mechanical thunder that could be felt through the factory floor before it could be properly heard, a vibration that traveled up through boot soles and into the chest cavity and registered as something closer to geological event than mechanical function. Factory trials through August and September 1939 revealed that the SMK could achieve approximately 35 kilometers per hour on good road surface, a figure that was acceptable for a vehicle of its class, and that its armor protection was genuinely formidable against contemporary anti-tank weapons, the 60mm Glacis plate defeating standard 37mm rounds at combat ranges in controlled testing. But the trials also confirmed what the engineers had privately understood since the specification was first drafted. The vehicle was too heavy, too wide, too tall, and too mechanically complex for the kind of war the Soviet Union was actually preparing to fight. And the decision to mount two turrets, a configuration the designers had themselves argued against in internal meetings, losing the argument because the Defense Committee wanted visual dominance as much as tactical capability, created a command and fire control problem that had no clean solution, because the commanders of both turrets required coordination that the vehicle's internal communication systems, based on voice tube and hand signal, could not reliably provide under combat conditions. And the SMK went to Finland in November 1939, not because the military high command believed it was ready, but because the Winter War had just begun, and Stalin needed the appearance of overwhelming force more urgently than he needed functional doctrine.
The Soviet invasion of Finland began at 0600 hours on the 30th of November 1939, when artillery formations of the 7th Army opened fire along the Karelian Isthmus in temperatures that had already dropped to -15 degrees Celsius overnight, and would fall further as the short gray Finnish day progressed, a barrage that the Finns had anticipated and partially prepared for, but which was nonetheless enormous in its scale and terrifying in its noise, the simultaneous detonation of hundreds of artillery pieces, creating a sustained acoustic event that flattened sound for kilometers in every direction and sent columns of frozen earth and pine debris skyward along the border positions. And into this opening phase of what Soviet planners had estimated would require no more than 2 to 3 weeks of military action, the SMK prototype was committed alongside the T-100, a parallel super-heavy design from the OKMO Design Bureau, and a number of KV-1 prototypes that were still technically under evaluation, all assigned to the 20th Heavy Tank Brigade, operating in support of infantry formations pushing toward the Mannerheim Line. The network of Finnish concrete bunkers, anti-tank ditches, wire obstacles, and prepared fighting positions that stretched across the isthmus, and which Soviet military intelligence had consistently underestimated in its pre-war assessments, producing operational plans that assumed breakthroughs within days against an enemy whose actual defensive engineering was, in several critical sectors, more sophisticated than anything the Soviet Army had encountered in its recent operational experience. The SMK crossed the border on frozen ground that cracked and compressed under its 55-ton weight, the torsion bars working constantly against the uneven surface of the forest tracks that Finnish engineers had not improved because improvement would have aided an invader, and the crew of 5, commander, driver, main gun loader, main gun gunner, and secondary turret operator worked in a fighting compartment where the temperature inside the hull was perhaps 5 degrees warmer than outside, which meant it was still well below zero, where every metal surface was cold enough to bond briefly with bare skin, where breath condensed immediately, and the visibility through the vision blocks was already compromised by frost forming on the outer surfaces of the episcopes. And the engine noise inside the hull was so pervasive that crew communication required physical contact or shouting at distances of less than 1 meter. The advance toward the Mannerheim Line through the first weeks of December was not the rapid operational movement the Soviet High Command had briefed to Stavka. It was slow, grinding, frequently halted by terrain that the maps had described as passable and that reality revealed as frozen swamp covered by a thin crust of ice that could bear the weight of an infantryman, but not a light truck,
let alone a 55-ton armored vehicle, and the SMK moved along the few hard routes available, routes that Finnish artillery observers had pre-registered with mathematical precision during the years they had spent constructing and improving the Mannerheim Line, so that when the Soviet columns appeared on those tracks, the shells arrived with an accuracy that suggested the Finns knew exactly where the armor would have to go, because the terrain gave it no alternative. On the 18th of December 1939, near the village of Summa, in a sector where the Mannerheim Line was anchored by a series of reinforced concrete bunkers designated by Finnish military cartography as Peltola and Popius, the SMK was committed to a direct assault alongside infantry from the 123rd Rifle Division. The temperature at 0800 hours recorded in surviving Soviet field logs as -22 degrees Celsius, with a wind from the northeast that reduced effective temperature further, the sky a flat white that gave no shadow and no depth, the snow on the ground compressed and crystalline rather than soft, so that tracked vehicles threw up clouds of ice particles rather than powder when they moved. And it was in this assault that the SMK encountered the Mannerheim Line, not as a line on a map, but as a physical reality of interlocking fields of fire, anti-tank ditches that the Soviet engineering assessment had listed as crossable, and which the SMK's length made genuinely problematic to cross without grounding the hull, and Finnish anti-tank guns, primarily the 37mm Bofors and the 40mm Bofors, supplemented in the heavier bunker positions by captured Soviet 76mm field guns repurposed for anti-tank work, which were largely ineffective against the SMK's frontal armor, but which found the vehicle's flanks, running gear, and optical systems with a persistence that spoke to Finnish marksmanship training and pre-registered firing positions. It was during this action on the 20th of December that the SMK struck a Finnish anti-tank mine, a device of relatively simple construction, a wooden box containing several kilograms of explosive, triggered by the pressure of the vehicle's track, and the detonation, occurring beneath the right rear track assembly, was sufficient to destroy 2 road wheels, sever the track, and blow fragments through the engine compartment bulkhead, and the vehicle stopped, immobile, in open ground, approximately 150 meters from the nearest Finnish bunker position, under direct observation and within effective range of Finnish anti-tank and artillery fire. And what followed over the next several hours was a recovery operation that became one of the more painful demonstrations of the SMK's fundamental operational problem. No Soviet recovery vehicle in the theater had the towing capacity to move a 55-ton immobilized tank under fire, and the crew evacuated under Finnish small arms fire, losing 1 man wounded, and the machine sat in the snow for the remainder of the Winter War, too heavy to recover, too exposed to repair in place. The Winter War ended on the 13th of March 1940 with the signing of the Moscow Peace Treaty, a document that gave the Soviet Union the territorial concessions it had originally demanded in October 1939, but at a cost in men, equipment, and international prestige that the Kremlin had not anticipated and would spend the subsequent 18 months attempting to process into military reform. And among the many pieces of equipment that Soviet recovery teams moved to retrieve from the Karelian battlefield in the days following the ceasefire was the immobilized SMK, which had sat in the snow near Summa for approximately 83 days, exposed to temperatures that had reached -40 degrees Celsius in January, subjected to periodic Finnish artillery fire that had added further external damage to the hull and turret surfaces, but had not penetrated the armor, and which was recovered by a team from the Kirov Factory that included several of the engineers who had designed it. Men who walked around the vehicle in the gray March light with the particular silence of professionals, assessing something they built being returned to them in a condition that confirmed their private calculations about its limitations. The recovery required purpose-built heavy lifting equipment brought forward specifically for the task, because the standard Soviet ARV, the T-26-based recovery tractor could manage perhaps 12 tons under favorable conditions, and the SMK weighed more than 4 times that. And the process of extracting the vehicle from the frozen ground, where the damaged running gear had partially sunk into the thawed then refrozen earth over the winter months, took the better part of 3 days, during which the engineers conducted a field assessment of the mine damage that was later incorporated into the formal report submitted to the Defense Committee in April 1940. That report, portions of which survived in the Russian State Military Archive and were partially declassified in the post-Soviet period, was a document of considerable technical honesty given the political environment in which it was produced. It noted that the SMK's armor protection had performed within design parameters against Finnish anti-tank weapons, that the main armament had functioned reliably in extreme cold when the crew followed preheating procedures, but that the vehicle's weight had rendered it operationally immobile in the terrain of the Karelian Isthmus, that the dual turret configuration had created command and fire coordination problems that were not resolved during the operational deployment, that the vehicle's ground pressure of approximately 0.64 kilograms per square centimeter exceeded the load-bearing capacity of most natural ground surfaces encountered in the Finnish theater in winter conditions, and that the single mine strike that had immobilized the prototype had done so partly because the running gear configuration placed the track in a position of structural vulnerability that the armor scheme, designed primarily against direct fire weapons, had not adequately addressed. The report's conclusion was essentially the conclusion the Kirov Factory engineers had reached before the vehicle ever crossed the Finnish border. The multi-turreted super-heavy tank was a developmental dead end, impressive as a demonstration of Soviet industrial capacity, but tactically unsuited to the conditions of modern warfare as actually encountered, rather than theoretically projected. And the Defense Committee accepted this conclusion with a speed that suggested it had not required the Winter War to reach it, but had needed the operational evidence to make the cancellation politically defensible. And the SMK program was formally terminated in the spring of 1940. The prototype returned to Leningrad for evaluation and eventual disposition, and the engineering resources of the Kirov factory redirected toward the KV-1, the single-turreted heavy tank that had also participated in the Winter War and had demonstrated that a vehicle of 45 tons with a single well-placed 76mm gun and clean, uncluttered armor could do everything the SMK promised to do at a fraction of the mechanical complexity and at a weight the Soviet logistics system could actually support. The KV-1 would go on to shock German tank crews in the opening weeks of Operation Barbarossa in June 1941, its armor initially immune to the standard German 37mm and 50mm anti-tank guns at combat ranges, buying time and causing tactical disruption at critical moments along the Leningrad and Kiev axes, and the lessons encoded in its design: simplicity, single primary armament, rational armor distribution, manageable weight, were direct descendants of the failure analysis conducted on the SMK in the spring of 1940, making the Soviet giant's brief and painful operational career not a waste, but a calibration, a physical proof that translated directly into the weapons that would eventually stop the Wehrmacht at the gates of Leningrad and hold the line through the worst winter of the 20th century's worst war. The SMK prototype survived the war stored at the Kirov factory, damaged but largely intact, and was eventually scrapped in the post-war period, its steel returned to the industrial cycle it had come from, leaving behind only the engineering drawings, the field reports, the damage assessments, the testimony of the men who drove it and the men who designed it, and the negative space it occupies in Soviet armor development, the shape of a mistake made honestly, documented carefully, and transformed into something that worked.